Good morning! Welcome back to the Cavalier's Tale. So, you know what this is? I'm very excited to get on with it. Let's get straight into it. For my sins, and I am honour and duty bound to cover each and every update for the KoE book. And it's my pleasure to go through Beta 3 with you today. So let's get started. Woo! Okay, so you know the drill, and it's all labelled. You should be able to read. Otherwise this video is not going to be very good for you. On the left we've got the old book, that is Beta 2, and on the right we have got the new book, helpfully labelled, and also the book on the right is Community Engagement as well. That's all the watermarks to make sure that we don't share it out, and if we do then we know who's shared it and who needs to get in trouble. So let's go through it, shall we? Let's go and find the first change. So the first one is in Gallantry. And it's purely a wording thing, adding on the same multiple instances of gallantry on the same model are cumulative, but multiple instances in the same unit do not stack. No change for the opponent, but it is a minor change for list building, and we will get into exactly what has changed later on when we get to the appropriate entry. After that, our next one is Courage. Courage has changed ever so slightly. To remove the clause that ordeal units, or units entirely with ordeal, don't cause panic in units with courage. That's been removed. Ordeal has had a clause added to it. In addition, characters may join a unit containing one or more insignificant rank and file models with ordeal, even if they aren't insignificant themselves, and gain insignificant while joined to the unit. So I'm sure from context there you can guess exactly what has happened to the ordeal units to make everything a little bit smoother in terms of like reading and causing panic, and how that works for the opponent, and how easy it is to glean that information from just simply looking at a unit entry without having to go back and check courage, ordeal, and honesty every time. It changes how panic interacts with, honesty units in particular as well, because ordeal now don't cause panic in them either because they're insignificant, which is pretty cool. So a little bit of a boost for honesty units, I suppose. Maybe a little bit of a boost for the appropriate ordeal units. And also we've got the cool thing of, we don't need to worry about, oh no, now lords and sainted lords and such can't join ordeal units. You can, because there's a little thing in there saying it doesn't matter if they're insignificant. You can join them anyway. Next up is mount support that has just been straight up removed. There were lots of complaints, fairly rightly so, I would say, that the heraldic steed for folk hero characters, damsels, and the Sky Heralds felt a little bit wrong. They're not a knighted character, so it doesn't, like, the guidelines of the mount, the rider needs to be stronger than the mount didn't really technically apply if you want to read the guidelines that sort of way. But now we don't have to worry about that kind of, ish loophole. It's just gone, and the Sky Heralds and the heraldic steed have been ever so slightly reworked to make them a little bit more sensible in that context. Next, the Breath of the Lady, the hereditary for the hereditary spell for KoE has changed. This is purely because the Relic Shroud is auto take, because it's crazy good to have your hereditary spell that is crucial to how your army works, and you can count it in core. So now the bound spell essentially only gives one blessing token instead of two. And if you've bought an heirloom for your damsel, then you can cast it on one dice and potentially get a token back out of that, depending on the dice that you've got at the end of the game, or at the end of your phase in the magic phase. Sorry. We move on to the special items. So let's go through the points real quick. So the Divine Judgment has gone up 5 points. Oh, I don't need to. Yeah, so 5 points for the Divine Judgment and a slight wording change. I guess Rules Clarity have had a debate about or and somewhere. So that's changed. Tristan's Resolve now can be put on paired weapons in addition to hand weapons and bastard swords. Mortal Reminder has had that little and changed. Uther's Metal has had that little and changed and has also gone down 5 points. Armor Enchantments. Percival's Panoply has lost without Towering Presence only. which I think is rather spicy, so we'll have to look at the implications of that when we get to the appropriate entry for that. And has additionally gone down 5 points, which, on top of the buff, is, you know, quite baffling, and is fine, I'm sure. We won't have any problems with that, mark my words. Fortress of Faith has been entirely reworked because it was a little bit naff and expensive for what it does. It's dropped 15 points, and now, while using this shield, the bearer gains +1 armor while its unit contains at least one rank and file model. So it's really good for, you know, a great weapon on a horse, because you can go heavy armor, barding from the horse is an extra 2. I guess it wouldn't be, you know, worth it for a great weapon because you can't use the shield. But if you go heavy armor, barding from the horse, a shield, and then this Fortress of Faith adds the 6 that gets you to a 1-up save nice and easily for 20 points, and it just means that you have to stay in the unit, which is fine because there are things that mean you want to stay in the unit, like things like Justice, or the new banner enchantment that you might have spotted up there, or Generosity, or Bodyguard with Knights of the Court, all that sort of thing. So that's all fine and good, and we're happy with that. Banner enchantments, so notably the Relic Shroud has gone down 30 points, and that's because the Breath of the Lady now gives 1 token instead of 2, to make it less of an automatic choice in core. The Oriflamme hasn't changed, the Banner of Roland has gone nowhere, hasn't changed. The Castellan's Crest hasn't changed. Banner of Elan has been binned because, I mean, I've taken it a whole bunch of times, like, you know, over the last couple of years, because it gets cheaper and cheaper, and it's a nice, you know, it's cheaper to put Banner of Elan on a core unit to make up that final 15 points than buying a whole new knight that takes you 15 points over core, and then you have to find 15 points elsewhere in the list to get rid of. You can just put Banner of Elan in. It's not going to go off, but whatever, and that was kind of the rest of the problem with it. I have made 2 double-6 charges with the Banner of Elan, trying to activate the banner to make myself hard to charge, and instead I've made the double-6 that I was trying to avoid. One of them I charged into a unit of ghouls, got flanked, and then died. And the other unit, 15 Feudal Knights outground 8 Shabti and won me the game, which was bonkers. I got some really good magic phases to get it off, and it also, I was kind of in a slightly better position, so it's like wasn't as terrible a charge as the ghoul one. But I have never once in my, you know, probably 100 games of using it, has it ever actually worked precisely as the rule says. I've never failed a charge and then been charged in the front and then got my strength 6 AP3 lances off the charge. It's only ever stopped an opponent from charging me instead, which doesn't feel nearly as cool. You know, it doesn't feel good for the opponent. It doesn't feel good for you because your cool banner enchantment doesn't work. You know, and if it's never happening, and if we're just filling up the final 15 points in core, why bother? Why have we got that in the book? Why don't we swap that out for something else? So that's been binned and has been replaced with the Lady's Favour, which is another thing to kind of encourage use away from Hippogriffs, particularly for BSBs. The Hippogriff has also seen a couple of other nerfs to try and dissuade building a tank build. So that's a you know, a 1-up rerollable with forbearance, and then you just give him BSB, because then a 1-up rerollable Res 5 monster that just sits there and is your BSB with an 18-inch bubble is horrendously good. So the 18-inch bubble has been added as a banner enchantment, but with a couple of caveats. So the Lady's Favour is 35 points for models with courage only, cannot be taken by the battle standard bearer. The bearer's unit may reroll failed discipline tests. If the battle standard bearer is part of the bearer's unit, it gains rally around the flag 18 inches, max 18. So essentially that means, you know, you can take a unit of feudals in core, give them the Lady's Favour, and then take a BSB on a horse, give him generosity, give him justice, give him faith, and then he joins the unit. If he leaves, he can leave, you know, assuming he hasn't got generosity. He can leave, but then he loses the banner enchantment because the banner enchantment is attached to the unit. The unit keeps its reroll discipline checks, but, you know, the BSB is now only a 12-inch bubble, which makes him a little bit more flexible, makes him a little bit more interesting. The 18-inch bubble, I think, is quite crucial to how... I mean, you know, you can go without, because the Slim Book did, but it's been in here for so long. And, you know, removing BSB from the Hippogriff, which is the thing that I'd wanted to see happen, ideally, is a bit difficult. 2 years into, or nearly 2 years into the lab process, people will have modelled BSBs on the back of hippogriffs, and it would be a kind of a shame to be like, we can't use those anymore. So we looked for alternatives to try and make this a little bit more accessible and not just stamping on options, trying to make things a choice rather than going for more carrot than stick, and hopefully that'll be something that will work, and I'm excited to try it out. I think with the couple of BSB builds that I've mentioned already, I think that could be really interesting, so fingers crossed that pays off. I do think it's quite cheap. I think that's probably a good thing for us testing whether or not it works rules-wise, but I do think points-wise it's rather cheap, considering a Banner of Discipline is, 10 points cheaper? I guess there's the caveat if the BSB has to stick with you, but meh. It's very good because of course that counts for break checks and things like that. So brutal. Next rules. So the Black Knight's Tabard has gone up 5 points. The Sacred Chalice has gone down 5 points, which I think is good because this is really cool. It's really awesome. Like I've used it once or twice and it's given me a couple of Veil tokens, and that's really fun. But like 20 points is quite a lot for when trying to squeeze it in as the final thing rather than anything else. It just gets dropped quite easily for things like an Obsidian Rock, which is just better, Dragonfire Breath, and a Potion of Swiftness, that sort of thing. So I'm excited to see that finally go down to 15 points. The Damsel, some points changes. Sainted has gone 5 points cheaper. Heraldic Steed and the Pegasus Charge have gone down 5 points. So has the Fey Steed. The Revered Unicorn has gone up 5 points, and the Destrier stays the same. Next up is the Equitan Lord. We're going to look at these bits first, and then we'll go on to his principles. So, the big change in terms of army list building is Sainted and Gallantry 1 is an option now instead of simply Sainted. So essentially what that means is Gallantry has been added to various light troops elements of the army. So courtiers that don't fly, hedge knights, the Fey Knight, Fey Steeds, they all have Gallantry, so they count towards your Gallantry counter of 7 now. In addition, a Sainted Equitan Lord or a Sainted Paladin will also count towards your Gallantry bonus. So a Sainted Equitan Lord now counts 3 towards your 7 counter of mounted on a Hippogriff, now counts 3 towards your Gallantry of 7. So that massively limits the number of single models that you can take in an army, especially at ETC. Particularly, what I was running was a BSB on a Hippogriff, a Sainted Lord on a Fey Steed. I had a Fey Knight and a Flying Courtier, and now that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So just on the very edge of what you can do. Things have changed elsewhere. I think that's 7. It might be more than that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So yeah, it stays at 7, but yeah. The idea is that you can't take like 2 Hippogriffs and a Sainted Lord on something and like a load of Hedge Knights and all that kind of thing. So it tries to limit the light troopsness of the army, which I think is very sensible because this isn't Sylvan Elves, it's KoE. You should be playing, to a certain point, have blocks of lances. The other big change is the Lord himself has gone down 20 points. Things like the Fey Steed and the Hippogriff have gone up in points to account for that. The Hippogriff has gone up 20, the Fey Steed has gone up 15. The Pegasus Charger has stayed where it is, so that's got 20 points cheaper. The Destrier has gotten 10 points cheaper, and the Lord has gotten 20 points cheaper, so it's 30 points cheaper to put a Lord on a horse now, because we never see them, especially big fighty characters. We just don't see big Lords on horses, so hopefully this will encourage, Lords in units, and in that case, it also encourages taking those units instead of big single models to try and encourage the army to be a little bit more knight-focused than Fey monster-focused. So, fingers crossed that works. The Great Weapon has gone down 5 points, and those are the changes to its points. So let's take a look at his knightly principles. Valor has gone up 5, Honor has gone up 5. In addition, the model's unit gains maximized charge, not simply the model. So you can join a BSB, for example, to that unit of Feudal Knights or Resplendents with Bodyguard give them the Lady's Favour, and then you give them additional maximised charge, so you're rolling 4 dice for it, which is like the Slim Book's Daring, which is really nice. Excellence has been massively changed. Instead of +2 AP in duels, it's now the model always gain, or the model part always gains lethal strike, and then in duels, you roll a 6, that'll give you multiple wounds 2 in addition to the lethal strike. I think, personally, this is a bit meh. I think I prefer the +2 AP, but so this is very much like the Slim Book's Renown, where you roll a 6, then you get lethal strike and multiple wounds D3. I used that once with Tristan's Resolve at a tournament, and I just didn't roll any 6s, and it meant that he had Strength 5 AP2 attacks, which is just not enough for a really expensive Lord. So I'm kind of thinking that this might, I don't know, like joining it with you force a duel, which is really good, obviously, for, you know, character hunting, and, you know, getting into the fights that you want to, which is what this Lord wants to do. But relying on him actually doing any damage on only a 6, unless you really beef the weapon that he's got, you know, take a great weapon with Eldritch Inscriptions or Cleansing Light or something, and then just have the extra as a bonus. But that feels quite expensive to do it that way, so personally I'm not sure about this. However, Ludeman and Sir Velin, the other 2 ACS members for KoE, both think this is really great, so I think they must have had better experiences with Renown in the past with the Slim Book. And I remember watching lots of battle reports with Wargaming from the Balcony, where Jean uses Renown an awful lot with paired weapons and Blessed Inscriptions at the time on one of his lords. So it must be good to a point. I think, you know, I'll just need to try it out for a few games and see what it's like. I mean, you know, it's basically old Renown, but also you can force duels, which is, you know, pretty cool. So we'll see how that goes. Justice went down 5 points. Forbearance can no longer be taken on Towering Presence, so there's your Hippogriff nerf there. You can't make a Hippogriff distracting anymore, which is, you know, a bit of a shame to do it this way, I think, maybe. But, you know, I think maybe you could have changed Forbearance to make it just worse on a Hippogriff, and then you could bring the points down. But I think at 40 points it's priced for a Hippogriff, and we're not going to see an awful lot of it for a little while, because it's a bit terrible. 40 points for a Res 4 mount. But we will see, and I could be wrong, because I've been wrong before, I guess. Faith's points haven't changed, but the guy gains Fearless. Personally, I think that's one of the unnecessary changes, and I think lots of Fearless in the game isn't really good for anything. But as a KoE player, I guess I will begrudgingly take my buff. Generosity hasn't changed, and that is the Equitan Lord. So moving on to the Paladin. The Paladin has gone down 15 points. He's gained Gallantry when he takes Sainted. It's also gone up 10 points for Sainted. The Great Weapon has gone down 5. The Destrier has gone down 15, so it's now 30 points cheaper to take a Destrier Paladin than it was. The Revered Unicorn has also gone down 15, so it's also 30 points cheaper to take a Paladin on a Revered Unicorn. The Pegasus Charger has stayed where it is, so it's now 15 points cheaper to take that. The Face Steed has gone up 15 points, so it's the same price to put a Paladin on a Face Steed as it always was. And the Hippogriff has gone up 15 points, so it is also the same points to take a Hippogriff with a Paladin as it was in the previous update. I think the problematic part of the Paladin is very simply that without having to spend any additional points other than his base cost, he gets a free 4+ Aegis against magical attacks. So that's any spell, any magic weapon, and various units in the game, like, you know, for example, when you're playing against demons or certain parts of the vampire book, you know, anything with magical attacks, and he becomes crazy difficult to kill, and he doesn't really have to pay for that. I mean, he's 5 points more expensive than a Lord. That's the problem with this entry, and I think particularly is why we saw so many of these on Hippogriffs. Hippogriff can't hide very easily, and it's very vulnerable to just getting blasted off by, you know, magic. Shooting as well, but like to a lesser degree, because not everybody has cannons and things like that can easily deal with that. The 4+ Aegis is huge. Like, you know, I don't know whether I spotted it at the time. I don't think I did, but you know, now having played the Paladin quite a lot and having seen the Paladin get played quite a lot, The big problem with this entry, or the high pick rate with the entry on the Paladin, is simply that he gets a free 4+ Aegis. I think if you swap that out for, I don't know, anything else, or just take it out, make him cheaper, make him immune to divine attacks or something, which might be quite fun, something like that, and leave him as he is, make him really pay for his 4+ Aegis, then I think it becomes a little bit less problematic. But yeah, so because obviously that works really well with Ghostly Guard as well. You've got a high armor and a decent Aegis save, and then you've got magical attacks. Well, that's fine. I've still got a reasonable armor save. You're probably going through the armor anyway, and then I've got a 4+ Aegis for free. And the armor enchantment has also been really cheap, so you can afford things like Black Knight's Tabard and a big fancy weapon, and keep yourself relatively cheap because you're not also paying for a knightly principle like the Lord is. So anyway, that's enough on that. That's why I think the Paladin has been seeing lots of play. We'll go on to the next one. The Folk Hero has seen some points changes. It's 5 points cheaper for the base version, 5 points down for the Pegasus Charger, 10 points down for the Heraldic Steed, presumably because it's had a couple of changes as we've seen with the mount support. The Revered Unicorn has gone down 10 points, the Destrier has gone down 10 points, and the Fey Steed has stayed at 75. All of his weapons options have stayed exactly the same. His heroic traits have changed ever so slightly. It's now 10 points cheaper to take Castellan. It's 5 points cheaper to take Quinn. Astonishingly, Cleric didn't change. I would have expected that to go up in points, but maybe that's my own experience rather than the meta-wide experience, so that's fine. Next up is the character mounts. So as I was saying, the mount support has been removed. Extra support has therefore also been removed because that's part of the eliteness of the mounts that we want to produce, so we can add over to the character or the rider that's riding it. It's now just got Devastating Charge +1 attack, so it's got 2 on the charge instead of all the extra faff that you need to worry about, which is nice. The Destrier and the Revered Unicorn stay the same, so does the Pegasus Charger, although saying that his Gallantry has gone down 1. The Hippogriff. So the Hippogriff is now got a special rule called Freedom of Flight, and the model's armor can never be improved beyond 5. So there's no more +1 for the mount, heavy armor for 2, that's 4, a 4+ save, a shield for a 3-up, and then Ghostly Guard to make it a 6, to make it a 1-up save, with Duskforge to make it rerollable, and then the Paladin for a 4+ Aegis. You can't do that anymore, but I guess really. And I did point this out. You just forego the shield, and then you've got 1 from the mount, 2 from your heavy armor, 2 from either Ghostly Guard or now Percival's Panoply, and you can take a 2-up save and give the guy a great weapon. And great weapons and halberds are far more reliably powerful than something like a lance or a bastard sword. A bastard sword because it's capped at strength 6 with a low AP, and a lance because you've got to be charging. Even Divine Judgment needs to have a charge initially to be able to get its high strength and high AP. Now you can just take Percival's Panoply, which also got cheaper, on there for a 2-up save without having to worry about taking a shield, and then you can stick a Great Weapon on him, stick, Mortal Reminder to make him cause terror and give him strength 7 AP 4, put Eldritch Inscriptions on there for rerolls to wound, Cleansing Light for divine and flaming attacks. Don't get me wrong, I'm very excited that we can finally take great weapons and halberds on hippogriffs, because it was a big thing in the Slim book that you could do with the old bastard sword, which was essentially a one-handed great weapon. But I think maybe this way, this method of nerfing the hippogriff wasn't quite the right way, because I think this has gotten better again. It's a much worse BSB, don't get me wrong, and it's not nearly so tanky as it was, but it's an awful lot more offensive, which is the aim of the mount, but whether it's gone too hard the other way, we will have to see. Either way, I'm excited to put a great weapon on my Sainted Lord on a hippogriff now. And then give him Valor and watch him destroy all sorts of things. Next, the Fey Steed. It's just some essentially cosmetic changes to make sure that the army is and the entry is working as intended. It now counts towards gallantry. It's got gallantry 1, and it's got exclusive. So no more joining sainted folk heroes to green knights to give them free heals for the green knight and stubborn to the folk hero, because that was silly. It was very silly, and if you do it, you know it was silly. You were exploiting something. And that counts for me too. So we've had a slap on the wrist and told, no, stop. It's not the thing you're supposed to be doing with that. So on to core. Right, okay, that's a surprise. We're going to do that in a moment. The feudal knights haven't changed. They've got 2 points extra for extra models, which is fine because feudal knights are crazy good. Like really, really good. Like to the point where it's, we see an awful lot more feudal knights than anything else. Like, I mean, obviously because it's the knight army. And we only have one choice of knight in core. Or do we? 3 cheers for hedge knights in core, finally. I almost managed to persuade, it got very, very close. The team almost decided to put hedge knights in core, I think for maybe Alpha 4 or something, a couple of updates ago. And then at the last minute decided, no, we're going to do this with them instead, which was fine. But I think this is going to be really good for people who want to play knights. And you want to play knights because that's why you're playing Kingdom of Equitan. They've kept light troops, but they have lost minimized panic, and they have lost +2 agility and -2 defense. So they've still got quite a lot of stuff going on for them in devastating charge. But you can only take 15 models of them per army, so no 2 lots of 9. Without minimized panic, they're quite susceptible to things like terror. I guess just as susceptible as feudal knights are, because they're only discipline 8, and they can't take magic banners. They can't give themselves a discipline banner, so you do need to keep them in a bubble if you don't want them to just flee off from some panic or something. But I think this is really interesting. They've kept light troops, but crucially they've also gained gallantry 2, which is huge. Like if you want to take just 1 unit of hedge knights, that counts towards 2 of your 7 counters for single models. So that counts towards your hippogriffs, your pegs, your sky heralds, your ladies courtier, the fey knights, the fey steeds, also all that sort of thing is also lumped in with the hedge knights, and hedge knights are quite hefty price wise in that context. So ideally you shouldn't be able to take 2 lots of big hedge knight units, A, because you can't take that many models, and B, it'll cut into your light troops units elsewhere. So fingers crossed this works really well. I'm really excited to have more knights in core. I think a lot of people elsewhere will also be excited to see hedge knights in core. I maybe would have liked to see them not be light troops, but I think the gallantry 2 makes up for that quite nicely and keeps their their niche knight role intact, which is nice. Auto sergeants didn't see any change at all. Lowborn levies and lowborn archers changed a little bit. Lowborn levies and archers both gained insignificant, so that's where the changes to ordeal and courage come in. And lowborn archers went down 5 points for the base and 1 point extra per additional model, and it's 5 points cheaper to give them a wall now, which is nice. There weren't bigger changes in core points wise, specifically because hedge knights have been added in, so that's an entirely new unit, so we're not sure what's going to happen with the internal balance, whether hedge knights will be massively popular or just never taken, or one unit is auto take, or people take 2 people, so we didn't want to change, or the team didn't want to change that much in the way of points without upsetting what is also already going to be receiving waves from the hedge knights being there. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what happens there. In special men at arms, points changes have gone down a little bit, so -5 points for the unit, -1 point for the extra models. Auto wardens have gone up a point per model, so it's down 5 for a unit of auto wardens. Everything else has gotten cheaper more significantly. The Sacred Reliquary has gone down 15 points to 180, and has also gained Fearless like Faith, so it's in keeping with that. Considering it's only Discipline 7, you're not going to be taking your Discipline checks on the Sacred Reliquary, I imagine, unless you use the Commanding Presence to set the Reliquary's Discipline to 9 and then take the Fear check on that for the unit. But, whatever. Oh, that's also minimized. It's also, yeah. So, you know, whatever. I think it's a minor buff. I think it's unnecessary because, you know, fearless in the game is not necessarily a good thing. It just makes fear a bit naff. But, you know, that's fine. Whatever. Knights Resplendent have gotten 10 points cheaper for the base unit and also gained +1 agility on the charge. So on the charge, now you get your charging momentum for +1, you get your devastating charge for an additional +1, which means these guys are striking at agility 6, which is pretty huge because you're now striking at the same time as things like, what's the elite Dark Dread Elf unit? Judicators or Obsidian Guard, whichever one of those. You're striking before one of them and at the same time as the other one, which is quite nice. Especially considering we have access to Deceptive Glamour and Know Thine Enemy. So if you really want to be striking before elves, you very much can be doing that quite easily. You'll be striking before regular men and orcs and elves with spears and dwarves with spears because you'll be striking at agility 6, and now you only get +2 from their spear, and you're already starting at 4, which is quite spicy. So I think this is... I don't know, I'm happy with the eliteness of this. I'm looking forward to trying them out. I think they're very expensive considering, you know, if you get caught off the charge or if you're caught in a second round of combat, they are exactly the same as Feudal Knights, essentially. You get +1 agility in that case and +1 offensive, and neither of those is going to help you survive very long. So I think... Personally, ideally, I think it would be really nice to up the points maybe a little bit and then just move that +1 attack to its profile and just have it as attacks 2 all the time. But, you know, I think this is cool. We'll see where this goes. Knight's Penitence. So, as is the fashion with a lab, we have flip-flopped back from Stubborn to Fearless. Supposedly because Stubborn wasn't good enough, but I think really Stubborn was very, very too good. So we've gone back to Unstable, and the special rule here is essentially you can't be longer than you are wide, so you can't conga line into something and then Unstable slowly die. And additionally, a folk hero with a cleric may join the unit and gains Unstable while joined to the unit, so the cleric will join, and if you get wiped in combat, then you distribute the health point losses to the unit, and then once you've got excess health points to distribute, at that point the cleric is dead. Is not dead, but you know, is no longer unstable, so wouldn't take the excess health points. I think that's how that works. But remembering how much cheaper they were when they were initially unstable, I think maybe they might be on the end of expensive at the moment, but they have also gained honesty since then, so maybe it's not so bad. Maybe they were underpriced in the first place because I had a lot of success with them. We'll have to wait and see. I'm excited to see that they're unstable again with a 2+ save, and since then they've gained honesty as well, which is nice. So, you know, I'm glad my boys are back. I took 2 units of them to ETC still, but it was 2 units of 3 as scoring Stubborn darts, which feels very... Ugh. So I'm very happy to see them as unstable. As silly as it is to have flip-flopped back to it from Stubborn, but it's nice to try different things. It's probably a good idea to try different things, so that's fine. Additionally, you might be thinking, well, a unit of 6 with Unstable is not going to be big enough. The upper cap for the models has gone up to 8, so it's no longer the 9 that it used to be, but you can join a cleric, so yeah, we'll see. 16 hit points is still quite a lot to get through when it's res 4 to up save and a 6+ with the access to a 5+, so yeah, pretty spicy. Knights of the Quest, astonishingly, have not changed still. That's fine, whatever. Hedge Knights are gone from special, they've moved into core. Yeoman Outriders have gone up 5 points, so it's now 150 to take your unit of chaff. Additionally, Ordeal causes panic in courage units and honesty units now. Yeoman Outriders didn't gain insignificant, so these got whacked this update. And stealth whacked, I think. So if you've got your Yeoman Outriders chaffing something, and then you do your feigned flight through a unit of knights, that unit of knights now has to take a panic check. You should be fine, like, you know, unless you've done something wrong, you should be on a 9 rerollable, but that's still very failable. And with a big expensive unit of knights, you might have just caused a panic that causes your great big lance of knights and potentially adjoining characters to flee because Yeoman Outriders fled through you. which isn't a thing that has ever happened before with KoE or Bretonia, as far as I know. So that's an interesting one to keep an eye on. Our chaff got whacked pretty considerably in like an awkward way. Like, it's not going to affect all the time. You should be passing your panic checks most of the time, but on the occasion that it will happen, it's going to feel dreadful. Okay, next up, enlisted outlaws. So minor change. They've gained insignificant because, you know, why would you care for your outlaws that are just there to repent for sins? Quick to fire has moved to the base profile from the longbow, so essentially that just means that the crossbows are quick to fire now if you take hooded men. Of course, throwing weapons on the base profile have quick to fire anyway, so minor changes there. The siege weapon, the trebuchet, the scorpion hasn't changed at all. The trebuchet option has gone up 25 points, so it's now 190 to take a trebuchet, but the hits from a trebuchet is now strength 5 AV1 instead of strength 4, which is pretty significant because now you're wounding things like, you know, res 3 rank and models, res 3 rank and file models on 2s, which is pretty spicy for when you're playing against elves. So I think for 190 points, it'd be worth taking one or two. Depending on the kind of list that you like. They're still very much the kind of model that you need to build a list around, but I think that's potentially very good. That makes a pretty big difference. Next up is Pegasus Knights. So they continue to drop in points. I think that's probably what's happened in this one. Or maybe they've gone up. Don't know. It's gone down 10 points for the base unit, down 5 for additional models. Nothing else here has changed. Sky Heralds have gone down 5 for the initial unit, they've gone down 5 for the extra models. The Rider has gained Devastating Charge, +1 attack, and extra support, which is cool, so you can go for a unit paired weapons and just output a huge number of strength 4 AP1, which is exactly the same as it used to be, but now it's the Rider doing it instead of the Heraldic Steed, which just kind of felt weird with a KoE book unit, so that's cool. Moving swiftly onwards, the Naiads have a very low pick rate, so they've gone down minorly in points. It's like 10 points cheaper for an initial unit. Savage Fury has been swapped out for Swarm of Insects, which, meh. I mean, you know, I think you're probably going to be taking one of the other 3 spells, most likely, particularly now that the 4th one isn't a combat buff, so unless you've got missiles elsewhere, it's not generally worth it. But, you know, maybe with a Div Master, that might be quite cool. Get your 3rd missile from that. That's pretty good. And it gives you your heal as well, which is useful for your big scary unit, big scary characters. The Friar's Lantern. So, last update, it was promised that if this massive points drop to 100 points didn't really affect anything, then we'd be changing how the unit worked quite considerably. And people were still starting to take it at 100 points, but considering how complex this unit is, like how much stuff it does, how many in-rulebook rules it uses, how many out-of-rulebook rules it uses, and how complex those are, the fact that it uses grind attacks instead of regular attacks, it's got hard target 2, it flies, it's got, you know, skirmisher, but it's a single model, so it doesn't block line of sight, all that kind of faff. Rubbish. So we've upped the points, made it a little bit more expensive to make the complexity worth it, and then changed it so that it's more effective chaff, so it's easier to use. So hopefully it'll be a bit more appealing for the regular user. So you'll notice that illusions has been removed, and so has feigned flight, and that's because the model can no longer flee at all because it's got fearless. So it just, you know, I mean, fearless flying chaff is really very good. I'm sure VC players will tell you. It's also got a march of 16, so it's still very, very good. So you don't need to keep it in discipline bubble. You can just park it in front of like a Feldrak ancestor and go, cool, charge me, whatever. You know, I'm not going to be fleeing. I'm not going to be fleeing through anything. I'm not going to be causing panic checks like Yeoman Outriders are going to be doing. And additionally, it's been easier for me to get to that spot because I fly and I'm a smaller footprint. So it's quite interesting. I think maybe this should have gone up slightly more points to be sensible, but who knows? Maybe it's not competing well enough with the rest of Fae. We've only got 900 points to spend on Fae, so. And the smaller footprint is bad if you want to chaff multiple units, but in addition to that, Lights in the Mist has been buffed. It's no longer a -2 to your advance and march rate, it's -3, which is massive. That's huge. If you hit Elf Cavalry with 918, they get debuffed down to, what, 615 with their advance and charge. That's huge. Like on a really, really fast, like the fastest cavalry in the game. Like I don't think there's anything with 10-20. Like that's astronomical high levels of debuffs to their move rates, especially when you consider that we have access to witchcraft, which does stack with this. So it's very, very, very easy to get like a -4 to your advance rate. The Lights in the Mist doesn't stack with itself, but you just get you fly through with one Friar's Lantern, stick behind a unit. That's -3 from that, and then you just get a witchcraft spell off, which is relatively easy to do if you take the right kind of magic and get that off. Then it's -4 to their advance rate and 6 to their march rate, which is huge. And with how fast and how easily it is to pressure with KoE, because everything is 8/16 at least if you want to do it that way. And then you can put like speed banners on there, you can put Castellan's Crest for rerolls. Honor can give a unit maximized twice from Swift Stride and Honor. It's a very particular build that you're going for at that point if you're very specifically using your Friar's Lanterns like that. But the way that you can just completely neuter a unit's fast move rate, that's pretty huge. Like particularly as you're most likely going to be playing something that isn't all really, really fast. If you can pick out the one unit that's very fast and is pushing back your charge ranges and just whack it with a Friar's Lantern, stick an Evil Eye on there, or even just the Friar's Lantern, you're going to reduce their threat range massively and be able to push into their threat range, or where they had a threat range, and then be pushing them into a corner, be threatening charges very early on. That's pretty bonkers. Okay, so final 2 units now. The Ladies Courtier has at last seen a debuff. Finally, the AP4 has gone down to AP3, and the Agility 7 has dropped to 5, which is far more reasonable and not quite so tooled up character level of awesome. It's also dropped in points to accommodate for that, so it's gotten 25 points cheaper for the base and 30 points cheaper for the boosted version. So the wizard version, sorry. They both also count towards your gallantry now. It's 2 for the flying. The flying version has also lost Awaken the Beast because, let's be real, that was kind of silly, given Scarification for essentially, a flying character demon. Yeah, so I think this is sensible. I think this is priced a lot more fairly now. I think you'll still see them because they're really good still, but hopefully fewer than we have been seeing. And then finally, some points shake-ups for the Fey Knights. Dropped 15 points for the base. You've gained exclusive, so you can't join it to other things. Gallantry 1, it's now counts towards your gallantry cap. The Chosen of the Snow Child, so that's the extra attacks for being a base contact, is now free, so that's 320 points for that. Warden of the Hooded Man is 325, and Champion of the Green Knight has stayed at essentially 335. And that is the lot on a cool 44 minutes. Thank you very much for watching. I will scroll through to the points so that you can have a look through that and, all that kind of jazz. Thank you for joining me. I will catch you in the next video, which, let's be real, is probably going to be KoE Beta 4. I will see you there. Whoops, almost forgot the thing. Hang on. There we go. So there's the changelog. Pause and read it. Pause and read it. And there's the points. Thanks again for watching. Catch you next time.